Okay, so welcome to the Arturia 2600 breakdown. This is a complete guide. It's not a review. So we are going to talk about every single slider, every single patch bay, every single function that this synth can do. So if you're looking for a tutorial or a guide that breaks down everything in 5 minutes, this is not it. This is an in-depth guide of the synth. So by default, the unit is pre-wired to make sounds. So the panel is just, a bit confusing at first, but once you get it, it's very easy to move around it. Now, I cannot recommend this synth if you're starting and you want to learn synthesis. I cannot recommend this one to, so you can start. So maybe you can try it a Minimog, the Minimog version of Arturia. I'm going to give you the link in the description, or maybe the Prophet 5. That would be a great start. Since this is a complete in-depth guide, everything is divided on different sections and everything is timelined. So it means that maybe you can watch a part today and maybe tomorrow you can watch a different part, or maybe use it as a guide. Maybe you don't remember how the voltage processor works, so maybe you can come back some other day and watch that section and learn how to use it and then just keep working. Okay, so let's start from the beginning, which is going to be the VCOs. So by default, everything is pre-wired, like I've told you before, and this can make sounds right out of the box. So the VCOs will flow through the VCF will go to the ADSRs, and then the VCA, and then the sound comes out. So notice that you get the VCO, VCO2, VCO3, and then right here on this section, you have the sliders for VCO1, VCO2 and VCO3. And I'm going to always start from a default patch so we can all start from the same place. Now, these connections that we have at the bottom are for the sequencer. I'm not going to cover the sequencer on this video because this is way too long. It can do a lot of things. And I'm going to record a different video just to talk about the sequencer. Okay, so of course, this can make some sounds right out of the box. So by default, you get the VCO number 1. And right here is where you control the volumes. If I go all the way down on the VCO1, we get nothing, right? We get no sound. So if I go up on the VCO1, we get the 1. If I go up on the 2, we get the 1 and 2. And if I go up on the 3, we get 1, 2, and 3. So notice that the VCO1 has less, it's a little bit smaller than the other ones. So with the other ones, we can do a bit more things. And the first one is a bit more limited in what it can do. But at the bottom, we have the pre-wired, and the colors right here means that this is the pre-wired, what this slider is going to do by default. Now, of course, we can override the default action by patching this to something else. Of course, we're going to do it in a few seconds. So by the default, the VCO1, it's going to be a square. And right here, you have the, the drawing right here, the icon of what it is. And the VCO1, it's a square. By default, it's just a square. You can control the fine tune right here at the top, 24 semitones up or 24 down. And we're going to cover, we're going to go very quickly through the obvious things. So then you have the fine tune, and the fine tune is that you can make it flat or make it sharp. So then you have the sync. We're going to talk about the sync in a few seconds. You can control the range right here of the VCO1. And you can even go into LF, which is low frequency mode, which means that you can turn this oscillator into a low frequency, into an LFO. Then at the bottom, you get all of these controls. Now, notice that you do get something like this on the other ones as well. So once we learn these ones, the other ones are going to be very simple. So the first control is going to be the key BDCV. So this is the keyboard. This one controls the connection of this VCO to the keyboard. So if I play a low C, I get it. If I play a high C, I get it. Now, if I go all the way down, this is going to disconnect the oscillator from the keyboard. So it doesn't matter which key I'm pressed, is always going to be the same frequency. It's very useful if you want to use this as an LFO. You can just disconnect the keyboard, go into low frequency mode, and you can use it as a constant LFO. And the frequency of your keyboard will not alter, the frequency of the LFO. That's pretty much what it means. But that's what you can do with this one. You just disconnect the keyboard, or you can, have it connected. So let's go all the way up right here. Okay, so I'm going to leave it connected to the keyboard. And then we have the audio controls, and they call FM controls. And it's because we can do frequency modulation with this. We can mess with the pitch of the VCO. So the first one is going to be the default, which is the S and H out. And this one is going to be the sample and hold. So if you don't know what sample and hold is, it's going to be like a random. We are going to talk about the sample and hold because we have a whole section right here to control the sample and hold. But in lame words, it's just random. So if you go up on this one, the default wiring is random. So what this is doing is just, randomizing the pitch of the VCO. And notice that, of course, since this is a slider, we're going to do a little bit, or we're going to do a lot. So this is what by default what it does. Then you have the ADSR control, which is the same thing again. All of these are just frequency modulation controls. It's going to mess with the pitch, but it's going to do it through the ADSR. So if I go up, we get that sound. Why? Right here we get the ADSR. So if I modify the ADSR, notice that the pitch is going to ramp up, and then maybe I'm going to go and use the ADSR. And at this point, I am assuming that you know how the ADSR works. So, of course, we go up and it's going to be connected to the ADSR. So we get that ramp up in pitch. Maybe I want to do a slow ramping down, or maybe I want to sustain at some point. And after I release the keys, I want to go back, that way. So then you have the VCO2 right here. So this means that you can use the VCO2 to frequency modulate the VCO1. And remember that all the oscillators, just like the first one, can go into low frequency mode. So we can use this as a low frequency oscillator. So we can use it as an LFO. And notice that it's working as an LFO. Now, so that's what it means. Now, by default, this is going to be a square. But maybe we want to turn it into something else. So now the patching begins. By default is a square. But, we can grab right here, grab the saw and say, dude, I don't want to be a square. I wanted to make it a saw. And this is where the patching magic happens. Now, by default, it says that the VCO1 is a square. So when we patch something, we are overriding whatever it says right here, and we are converting this control into something else. In this case, we are turning the VCO from a square to a saw. So now if I do a saw, notice that we get a saw. Now let me just modify the envelope. Let me do something like that. So now we get a saw instead of getting a square. Now we can invert the control, which means invert the saw. So now it's going to be an inverted saw. And if you still want a square, you can of course go right here and just make it a square. By default, it's already a square. So you don't need to, of course, patch it to do that change. Now, one more thing that you can do is that you can right click on the patching and you can manually go through the menu and select what you want to do, and notice all the things that you can do. Okay, so let's talk about the oscillator number 2. The one, it's very simple. Now the oscillator number 2 can do the same things. And again, to listen to the oscillator number 2, we're going to need to go up in volume on the oscillator number 2. And notice that the icon is a little bit different. The first one, it says a square, but the second one, it's kind of a square, but it's narrow. Now, by default, this is a square. Still, it's going to sound like the first one. Let me just, do this and do this. It's going to sound like the first one, just like the first one. But what this can do, it can do pulse width modulation. So we can modulate or just make the pulse narrow. So the first one, again, works like the first one. The fine tune is the same, sharp or flat, but right now we get the pulse width, which is what we don't get on the first one. So we can modify the width of the square. That's why the icon right here is just, a little bit narrow, because we can do pulse width. So the other thing that this can do that this cannot is that we can work with different waveforms. By default is going to be, a square, but we can make it a triangle if we wanted to, right? We can make it a triangle and maybe we can make it a saw. I'm gonna go and make it a saw, right? We can still invert it, right? We can make it a sine wave, which is really cool and useful. And we can make it a pulse. And notice that this one will respond to the pulse width modulation as well. Now at the bottom, the pre-wired connections are going to be a little bit different. There are still, some of them are still the same, and they do the same thing, like the keyboard is going to be exactly the same as the first one. The sample and hold is going to be the same thing. The ADSR works the same way, exactly the same way. But then we start getting some other options. Now we can frequency modulate this one with the VCO1. Now on this one, on the oscillator number 1, we can modulate it with the VCO2. So now the VCO2 can be modulated with the 1. So I can just go into low frequency mode on the VCO2 and just go up on the VCO1. And we are going to get, a low frequency modulation. Right, so we are doing the same thing, but kind of backwards. But this one has a different option. Now this one's can do pulse width modulation. That's why you get the PWM. So you can modulate this width by by doing some kind of modulation. By default is connected to the noise generator. So right here we have a dedicated section for noise generator. So if I go up, this is gonna modulate the pulse width. Now, of course, sometimes using noise is just, maybe not that fun. Maybe we can do something else. That's why we have the patch bay. And I'm just giving you a small example. Let's say that we want to modulate the pulse width, but not with noise. We want to do it with something else. So by patching, we can override the noise generator with something else. Let's say I want to use the saw of the oscillator number 1, and I'm going to go in low frequency mode. So this is going to be used to modulate the pulse width instead of using the sample and hold. So it's just a little bit more predictable and controllable. That's how the patching works. Okay, so now if we go to the oscillator number 3, it's going to be a complete copy of the oscillator number 2. It's just the same thing, just the same controls. You can still do pulse width. You have the same, waveforms, exactly the same. The keyboard out is the same. Noise generator, this is different. So on the other ones, you work with the sample and hold to do that frequency modulation. On this one, and notice that by default, this one is a saw, and we can see it right here. So the frequency modulation on this one is going to be noise. So it's going to be just a little bit different, of course. It's not random, it's noise. Now the ADSR works exactly the same. So let me just go back because it's just the same. And this one can be frequency modulated with the VCO2 in this case. This one uses the 1 and this one uses the 2. So, we got different combinations. So let's go to low frequency. And there you go. So the oscillator number 3 can do also pulse width modulation, but the instruction, the pre-wiring, is a little bit different. It says VCO2. The other one says noise generator. It's just a little bit different. So if I go up and notice that we are on low frequency mode, we are not getting anything. It's not doing, pulse width modulation like we get it right here. And it's because by default, the VCO3 is a saw. So we don't get pulse width with saw or sine waves. We get it with with pulse. So if I go and wire the VCO3 to be a pulse, now we are going to get that low frequency oscillation. We are modulating the pulse width. Now I'm going to go to low frequency mode. There we go. Now it's moving. So let me go back to a default patch. And just like we discussed previously, by patching something, we are going to be modifying the default behavior of this. For example, right now we know right here that the VCO1 is a square, and we can use the ADSR to get that pitch modulation, right? But maybe since the ADSR is the one that is going to be controlling what comes out, I don't want to use it because it's already in use. So what we can do is we can patch the AR right here to the out. And of course, we're going to talk about this in a few minutes. So now the modulation, instead of being controlled by the ADSR, is going to be controlled by the AR, which is, a little bit different. So we can leave the, the ADSR untouched, and the modulation will be from the AR. That's why, when the patching magic happens. So let's say that I want to use the sample and hold, but maybe I don't like it that much. Maybe I want to patch something else. So you can still use maybe the sine wave of the VCO2, use it on low frequency mode, and get that modulation from the low frequency mode of the VCO. Now, of course, at the same time, you can make combinations. We are using just the VCO1, but maybe I want to use the VCO3. Right? So you can use all the oscillators at the same time if you wish. This one is on low frequency mode, so we're gonna hear a click, but you can still bring it up if you wish. Okay, so let's talk about oscillator sync. I'm going to start from a default patch. And now that we know how everything works right here on this side of the things, we can use oscillator sync. So what sync does, this control does, this one, it will make the VCO be synced, be in sync with the oscillator number 1. So oscillator number 1 becomes a master and oscillator number 2 becomes a slave. That's the whole idea. So oscillator number 1 will be forced to be in sync. So for example, if I go and play the oscillator number 1 and 2, this one is a saw. I'm going to go and make it a saw. And this one, I'm going to make both saws. And actually, they are both squares. And I'm just going to use the squares for both. Why not? So if I play something, notice that we get that big sound. And it's by default, the oscillators are a bit detuned with the default patch. So if I double click on the fine tune, they sound on the same spot. That's why they sound a little bit phasey. So as you detune the oscillators, of course, you're going to get this bigger sound. That's, very common. Now, of course, if I detune this, you're going to get that, that detune sound. If we use sync, the oscillator number 2, remember now it's a slave of oscillator number 1, so the frequency will be forced to restart with the oscillator number 1. So we are not going to get that detuned sound because the oscillator number 1, remember, is the slave. So the frequency is being forced. Now, the magic happens with oscillator sync when we start modulating the fine tune or when we change the, the frequency of the slave. If I play something and I go lower, notice that we get a cool sound, but we never go out of tune. Now, of course, we can change the ranges. And we're going to get that sound, of course. You can go up as well. Now, one of the magic that happens with oscillator sync is when you start modulating the frequency of oscillator number 2. Right now, we are not doing that. We have a fixed kind of a position there. So remember, we can patch pretty much anything. So what we can do, maybe just to show you, I can patch the 1 and the 2 to make both saws right here. We can do that. And then maybe I want to modulate the frequency of the number 2 because we know then when we are in sync, the magic happens when we modulate the frequency. So right now, by default, the ADSR is the one, connected right here to do modulation with an envelope. What we can do, we can just, modify this behavior. I'm going to connect the ADSR to the out of the AR. So now the AR is going to be in control to frequency modulate, to modulate the pitch of the number 2. So we get a movement. If I make it really slow, we can not hear it, but if I go up, it's too much, right? So maybe sometimes the trick is just to do a little bit, and we're gonna get that sound. Maybe we can, of course, change the frequency right here. And nothing stops us from, maybe bringing the oscillator number 3 I'm going to convert it into a pulse, and we can use the pulse width, and we can modulate the pulse width with the VCO2, but the VCO2 is a slave of 1. So maybe I want to use the same AR. So we can use with some patch base, we can use the same port just, to modify or control different things. And if we bring the volume, we can make it maybe lower, something like that. And now notice at the right side, you have some controls. You can add a little bit of reverb. It's a spring reverb, and it's, very long, but, it's just the way it is. Maybe the frequency is too low. Let me do 16, and I guess it's just going to sound a little bit better. Right, so now let's talk about the BCF. So the BCF is the filter, of course, and we have pretty standard controls right here. We don't have anything weird. Now, right here at the top, we can, of course, and notice that we are using a default patch. I'm going to go to default right there. And we are using the oscillator number 1. If we cut off frequencies, we start cutting the high frequencies. Right, so pretty simple control. Now then, notice right here that you have different modes. You have low pass of 24, which is going to be aggressive. Then you have the 12, which is going to be the same, but a little bit less aggressive. And, we can see it right there. Then you have the high pass mode, which is going to be the same, but the opposite. We're going to cut off the low frequencies. Right, so pretty simple. And then you have the band pass and the notch. Now, the band pass and the notch, they work with the resonance and the notch frequency. The band pass is going to create a band pass. If I go all the way up on the filter frequency and I go down, notice that nothing happens, nothing much happens. And it's because this is going to be controlled by the resonance. As we go up on resonance, and then we move the filter frequency, we are creating that notch. So when you use the band pass, you need to use it with the resonance control. If not, you're not going to get, that band pass effect. Right, so then you have the notch, and the notch, of course, works the same way. I'm going to go right here and do the notch, and if I cut frequencies, we are going to be getting that notch. Right, so pretty simple. Now, then you have the notch frequency, and this one will move the notch up or down, of course. Right, so again, just very simple controls. And then you have the fine tune. Let me just show you how the fine tune works. Right now, we are doing a low pass of 24, and I'm going to be cutting some frequencies, and I'm going to be doing some resonance, right? So the resonance means that we are adding a peak right at the break point, right here. Notice that you can see the peak right here. So the fine tune will just kind of adjust the resonance or the break point by some amount, and it's a very small amount. And notice that right here gives you the frequency where the notch is. If I move it, notice that right here on the spectrum, the frequency is just moving a little bit to 816, or you can go to the other side. So you're just adjusting the, that peak a little bit. That's what the fine tune is going to do. Of course, all of this works, depends on what you do. The fine tune without the resonance is not going to do much, right? And that's, how the filter works. Pretty simple, pretty, common filter. Now, then at the bottom, you can see that the VCF, it's kind of a combination of an audio mixer and the modulation section. It says audio and then control. So this one is the control for all the, of course, oscillators. We already talked about this. So they all flow through the BCF and then go out. But then you have another one, which is going to be the ring mod. So this is what the ring mod does if we just bring the ring mod along. Now the controls for the ring mod are right here. We are going to talk about this later, but if we modify them and you can alter them right here, it's going to sound a little bit different. Now the ring mod sounds a little bit better when we bring some other thing. Right? Now I'm going to go down on the ring mod, and remember that right here you have, of course, as well, you have the noise generator. You could have the filter, the oscillators, the ring mod, and the noise generator. And this is going to be chest noise. Now, right here at the bottom, you have the control for the noise generator. So you can do white noise, which is going to be, if I go all the way up on the frequency and I'm not cutting anything, it's going to be a little bit annoying because it's just noise, white noise. And notice the slope, how it is. So this control is going to modify that slope. You're going to get pink noise, you get a lot of, you cut the high frequencies, and then the low frequencies, you're just going to get, the low frequencies. And this control will control the amplitude of the white noise. Now, maybe you're thinking, okay, so why do we get this control since we can control it from here? And it's because you can use this as a modulation, generator. Just like we are using, for example, the sample and hold on the oscillator number 1. Let me go to the number 1. We get that. We can go right here and use the sample and hold, which is the random. But maybe I don't want to use the, sample and hold. I want to use the noise. So you get the out right here. We can connect it there. And now sample and hold, it's not in control anymore. It's going to be the noise generator doing that modulation. And you get the control right here. So you can control the amplitude of that noise. That's why you get it. Then you get the next big thing, which is going to be right here, the controls for the filter. Now, one more thing before we move forward, we talk about this. All of this is just changeable. Right now, we have the ring mod, right? But maybe I don't want to use the ring mod, right? I want to use something else. So maybe I want right here on the ring mod, I want a saw from the oscillator number 3. So you're overriding the ring mod and you're just getting a saw from the number 3. The same thing, maybe I don't want, the VCO1, or maybe I don't want the noise. I don't want it. Maybe I want maybe a sine wave from the oscillator number 3, the same oscillator. So now we are just, getting a more complex waveform from a saw and a sine wave. At the same time, maybe I don't want to use the VCO1. I want to use the pulse width of the VCO3. So you can connect it right here and maybe modify the width. And now you're just getting a more complex waveform from one single oscillator. Just by, patching one single oscillator to the audio, because remember, this is a mixer. So let's go back to a default patch and let's talk about the modulation we get for the oscillator, for the frequency, for the VCF. So you get 3 main controls. First one is going to be the keyboard CV. If you remember what this does on this one, on the oscillators, is that we can, disconnect the keyboard. So now every single key we press, any key, is going to be the same. Now here, it doesn't work the same way. This is the keyboard control more than, CV. It's keyboard control. If you know what it is, of course, you will know what it is because you have the experience. If you don't know what it is, this one will create kind of a slope. So if we are cutting frequencies, we can hear the high frequencies. Now, let me just give you an example. I'm going to do a lot of cutting. Maybe not a lot, but I'm going to cut some frequencies right here at the top. So if I press or play high keys, they sound a little bit dull, a little bit dark. And it's because, of course, we are cutting the high frequencies right here at the top. And it makes sense. So if I play lower keys, we can hear them because we are not cutting them. So this keyboard control will create a slope behind the scenes. And it's kind of letting the filter open a little bit more when we play higher keys. And it's going to close it a little bit more when we play lower keys. So now if I play higher keys, we can hear them, right? They are not dark anymore. And it's because, we have this slope. If I go to the lower keys, they sound lower. If I go all the way in, the higher keys are going to sound super bright. It's like we are not cutting frequencies right here at the top. And as we go down, the lower keys are going to sound darker and darker. So then you have the other control, which is going to be the ADSR. And this is, the most common way of filter modulation we get, using an envelope to modulate the cut of frequency. So let's say I want to play a note or play a key, and I want to generate that movement. Of course, this is, with the envelopes. And again, I'm assuming that you already know a little bit of synthesis, so I'm not going to explain how an ADSR works. So, okay, so with this one, of course, we allow more or we allow less to modulate the cutoff frequency. So if I do something like this, maybe we are going to get, a very short modulation of the cutoff frequency. It's just opening, not opening much, and then closing. If I do really slow, we're going to get that, slowly ramp up. We can go down if I go like that. And of course, we can sustain it at some point. And when I release the keys, I want it slow going back. That's what it does. Of course, this control, we can do less or we can do more, and this will affect how much modulation we do to the cutoff frequency and with the envelope. Okay, so I'm going to go back to a default patch so we can start over. The second control is going to be the VCO, the third control. And this is a modulation. So the VCO2 is hardwired or pre-wired to modulate the frequency, the cutoff frequency. Now the oscillator number 2 right now is just an oscillator. If I go up on this one, you're going to get that movement. It's not an LFO. But if we make it an LFO, we're going to get that LFO modulation. Now by default, the modulation is going to be a sine wave. Right, I'll make it just go slower. And maybe add a little bit of resonance. Right, but that's it. Now maybe I don't want this. I don't want, a sine wave to modulate the cutoff frequency. Always, you can override this. So maybe I want the LFO, the VCO2, and in this case, I want to saw. So then you go there and you just going to be modulating all of this with a saw, right? So pretty simple. Now, one thing is that sometimes is a little bit annoying, and I'm going to go right there. It's not annoying, it's just the way it works, is that by default, the BCF is always going to be connected to the ADSR. And the sound of the synthesizer comes out of the ADSR. So if you're using this modulation, you're using this to modulate the cutoff frequency, something like that. Let me do something useful. Maybe something like that, right? The sound, the modulation of the cutoff is being controlled by the ADSR, but the output is being controlled by the ADSR as well. So you have two choices. You can connect the ADSR and overwrite this and use just the AR to create that filter modulation. And the ADSR can be untouched. So this is going to control the amp, what comes out, and this is just controlling the filter modulation. Or you can do the opposite. Right here on the right side, and we're going to talk about the BCA in a minute, you can control which one is going to control the BCA. Right now, the ADSR is all the way up. So this is the ADSR is controlling the BCA. If I go all the way down, I go to the AR. Now the AR is going to control the VCA. If I go all the way down, notice that this is just controlling the volume. So we can, use this to our advantage, because now the ADSR is free and we can use it maybe to control the modulation of the filter or maybe other things, right? Because it's free. All right. So now notice that just like with the noise generator and other modules, you get an out. And this is something that you get on pretty much, pretty much in everything, So this means that we can use the out of the ADSR to control something else. And we already did this, right? So with the AR, you can, we already did this as well. We know we can do that. But then we have the filter. And, these are envelopes, how the filter is going to work. So, well, the filter, and I'm going to go back to a default. Remember that all the oscillators, everything that goes out right here, goes through the filter and then goes out. So, of course, we are going to get at the end some sound or some kind of a waveform, right? So we can use that sound, the sound that comes out of the filter. Let me just do something a bit more There we go. So we can use this sound as a modulation source. Whatever sound that comes out, let's say that I'm going to go to BC01 and I'm going to do a little bit of, modulation with whatever that comes out from BCF. And we are going to get that. And it sounds a little bit like noise because, of course, it's a much more complex sound. This is what we get at the end. If I go down, this waveform is going to be modulating this audio source. It's going to be modulating the frequency of the number 1. That's why, you get out on a lot of, these modules. All right, so let's talk about the ADSR and the AR, and I'm starting from a default patch. So we kind of already know about the ADSR. We know that we can use the out to use it as a modulation source. We know that by default, it's controlling the VCA, the volume, how the volume goes out, how the sound goes out. And we can disconnect this or go down and then use the AR instead of the ADSR. So we can have a free ADSR to use it as a modulation source. We can know this. We've been doing this. Now, you have an option right here, a patch bay, which is going to be the trigger of the ADSR. So by default, the oscillators will emit a constant sound. That's how it works. Then, of course, the sound goes through the filters, and then the ADSR will decide how the sound goes out. So if I play a key, it opens, and when I release the key, it closes. Right? That's the ADSR controlling pretty much everything. But if I turn off the ADSR, or maybe I disable the ADSR, the sound will be constant. And it's because, of course, the keyboard is triggering the ADSR. And what I can do, I can use something else to trigger the ADSR. So maybe I want to use a pulse, right? And let me just go first right here. Make sure that you're using this one and not the AR. And now I'm going to go to low frequency mode on the oscillator number 2, and I'm going to connect the pulse. Now the pulse is an on and off kind of a behavior. So now it's going to open and close the ADSR. So that it's triggering the ADSR. And if I go slower or faster, it's just going to open and close faster or slower. Now remember, if I press a key, it's going to change the speed because this is still connected to the keyboard, remember? So I can disconnect this, and now the sound comes from the oscillator number 1. If I play a key, that frequency will still change, but the speed of how it opens or closes is not changing because we are not listening to the keyboard on this one. If I listen to the keyboard and I press a low key, it goes slower. If I press a high key, it goes faster. Right? So we can disconnect this and we can actually disconnect this, and now we'll have a constant sound. It doesn't matter what we press. So this one, it's opening and closing the ADSR. Right, so let me go back to a default patch. Then if we go to the AR, we have something similar. So we have the attack and release. We don't have the decay and sustain on an AR. That's why it's AR. We can still, use the out to use it as a modulation source. We know that. And now I'm going to go right here, and instead of using the ADSR, I'm going to use the AR as a, as VCA envelope. It's just to control what comes out. So, if we do something, now the AR is in control. Now, notice that, again, we get the out, but then you have a start. So this one, it's like this, but this is a button. It's not an out, it's not an in. If I press it, it's going to trigger, it's going to open the envelope, and, we're going to get a sound from whatever oscillator that we are, using. If I bring the 2 and the 3, and this, I'm clicking with the button, with the mouse. So it's like, just a manual control. So you can manually trigger the AR. It's just something, something cool that you get on the synthesizer. You can manually kind of trigger this. Now then you get these options right here at the bottom, and these ones are very related to kind of the sequencer. I'm going to disconnect them for now. By default, just like the ADSR, the AR is connected to the keyboard. So when I press a key, it opens, and then of course it's going to close, and the instruction is going to be decided by the A, which is the attack, or the release, how slow it fades when we release the keys. So by default, it's keyboard, and this is, what it says right here, keyboard and gate. So if I go to the other one, right here, And I'm not pressing anything. Notice I'm not, playing any keys. So we're going to get that. So what we are doing, we are kind of doing the same thing we are doing right here. We are disconnecting the keyboard, so the keyboard is not controlling what opens and closes the AR. It's not triggering the AR. So what is going to be, in control? The sample and hold. Now the sample and hold right here has a rate, and it's how fast, or how slow, or how fast. Now we will talk about the sample and hold in a few minutes, but that's what it means. By default, it's pre-wired to trigger with the sample and hold. But again, just like we did with the ADSR, maybe I can connect this to an LFO, to the oscillator number 2, and control it with an LFO. So, that's going to be the same thing. So there you go. All right. So then you have the other controls, and this one's the gate and the trigger are something that we can really use with the sequencer. That's why they are just kind of when we do the default patch, they're just, kind of already connected. So right here, the gate, pretty much what it will do is just a gate. It's something that it will open and closes. It has no sustain. It has nothing. It just open and closes. So for example, let me just think about this. If I, maybe do a little bit of this, I do a little bit of filtering. Maybe I want to use the ADSR. So, let me do some resonance. We are going to get that movement because the ADSR is just providing the instruction. Now the gate has no idea how to do this because it has no decay, no sustain, no anything. So if I connect this and override the ADSR and I play something, the filter is just going to open and close. Because again, remember, this is just it's just a gate. It has no idea how to do anything else. It's just going to open, stay open, and just, go down and close. Then you have the trigger, and the trigger is a little bit different, and you can see it right there on the icon. And these are outs, of course, they're not ins. So the trigger is just gonna do a tiny trigger. So I'm gonna go and do the same thing, and you're gonna notice the difference. Notice that we do get some movement right here. It's not like the gate that it's just going full on or full off. We get a tiny trigger. So that's the main difference. Now, these ones are very useful with the sequencer. So we're going to talk and use them a lot when we talk about the sequencer on maybe the next video. Okay, so let's talk about the VCF right now. We are always starting with the default patch, and the VCA is kind of simple. We kind of already know this because we talked about the AR and the ADSR, that we can make it linear or exponential, or we can use the AR instead of the ADSR. So we kind of already know about this. Now, of course, we have this too, and notice that it says audio right here. We're going to go back in a minute, but if I go down, all the way down on this one, we are not going to get anything at all. So this is the VCF volume. It will attenuate what comes out of the VCF, and ultimately it's going to go to, through the VCA. So if you're not getting any output from the VCF, we get nothing. But, this control will attenuate that. Same thing with the other one. The other one is the ring mod, whatever we get from here. So if I go up, we are going to just get the ring mod and maybe a combination of the VCF at the same time. Now, the cool thing is that you can grab the audio and you can modify this behavior. Now, if you don't want the VCF, you can have something else feeding through this. Could be anything. For example, we could go and bring a saw. And this one is not going to be the VCF anymore. It's going to be this saw. And notice that this is not going, the VCO3 is not going through the VCF. So, we have, a pure oscillator going through the VCA and then going out. Now we can do the same thing with the ring mod. Maybe I want the opposite. I want the VCF to do something, and then I want on the ring mod, maybe a different sound, maybe a pulse. So now we can combine whatever we get from the VCF, which is the, the normal sound. Maybe we can do a little bit of that, a little bit of that. And now on this one, on the ring mod, we can get the sound of a pulse of the oscillator number 3. And we can combine both sounds. Now then, of course, you get the out of this. Just like you get the out for the VCF and the VCA and everything else, you get the out for this one. Now, sometimes when you connect some out to some, places, for example, different ins, you're going to be like feedbacking and maybe the plugin is going to crash. So you need to be careful with that. Now, for example, on this one, what we can do, we can connect the VCA to the left in, and we're going to talk about this section in a minute. So now if I patch this here, notice that I can only hear what comes out of the VCA, and I'm going to go and maybe do something like that. I can only hear what comes out of the VCA on the left side of the speaker, but I'm not getting anything on the right. So now on the right, maybe I want to connect the pulse, and now we have a constant tone on the right side, and whatever that comes out of the VCA, we have it on the left side, right? And then at the top, you have the global volume. Pretty self-explanatory. We just can go down in volume and go up in volume. I don't need to explain anything. So let's talk about the mixer right here, the out. So the output stage looks a little bit confusing, but it's really not. So right here at the bottom, and I'm going to go always start from a default patch. Right here at the bottom, you have two main things. You have the VCF and you have the VCA. So the VCA, it's, again, this out is whatever that comes out from the VCA. So if I'm doing that, I'm doing the same thing. So of course you can attenuate and you're not going to get anything because you're going down of whatever that comes out from the synthesizer. But you can control volumes right here. So at the same time, what you get is the VCF. So whatever that comes out from the VCF without going through the ADSR and the VCA, you're going to get it and it's going to be constant. So notice I'm not playing any keys. If I play a key, of course, it's going to output a constant sound because it's not going through the envelopes. And you're just, getting that signal directly. The cool thing is that you can get a little bit of this and you can combine this with whatever that comes out from the VCA. So now the keyboard, of course, we hear what is being controlled when it comes out through all the stages. But you can have a little bit of what comes out of the VCF without going through the ADSR and everything else. And again, just like these ones are audio ins. Maybe I don't want that VCF. I want, that constant pulse. So I can just bring that pulse and then blend it with the original sound. Right? So pretty simple. So maybe you're looking at this and you're saying, oh, okay, so this one is, the input of the left and the input of the right. Well, not really. This one is going to be pretty much an output of the VCF and the VCA. So if I do something like this, nothing is going to happen. But this one, it's like this out or this out. But the thing is that it's for the VCF or the VCA. So maybe if I go something and do something like this, maybe we're going to enter into that feedback territory. Let me just bring right here a little bit of volume. Can you see the changing tone? I'm going to go up on this one. And notice it's changing. And it's because we are using this one to modify the behavior of this one. But this one is going to be the out of the VCF. So same thing, you get the out of the, the out of the VCA if you wanted to. So if you go up, and this is the confusing part. Now you get the left in and the right in. So right here, it means that these ones are ins. It means that you can connect something to the left and something to the right. So for example, if I wanted a saw right here on the left, I'm going to get a constant tone from the saw in the left side of the stereo field. And on the other one, maybe I'm going to get a square. Right? So you're going to get left and right. Now, when you do this, what is going to happen is that, let me just, disconnect it for now. What is going to happen is that you cannot use the panning. Because if you think about this, you're just saying play this in the left and play this on the right. You don't have any panning, right? So that's going to happen. You kind of disable the panning for this one. And I'm going to use the triangle and I'm going to use the sine wave because, it's just a bit easier to hear. And notice if I move the panning, nothing happens. So then you have the other thing, which is going to be this one. So this one is going to be pretty much what comes out of here, and you can connect other things. So if I do a saw, I'm going to get a saw, and now the panning is going to work because you are outputting the saw to the left and to the right. So you get a panning on the left and you get a panning on the right. So this is again a combination of left and right. Now this doesn't mean that you cannot bring something from, for example, on the left. So now I'm going to bring a sine wave. So now the sine wave is going to kind of play on the left. If I go all the way to the left, we get the sine wave. And as soon as we go up, we get a blend of the left side and the right side. And we get more of the saw. But notice if I go all the way to the right, we are getting the saw, but we are still getting a little bit of the left. Right, so that's what it means, you know, that's what it does. But let me just disconnect this. So as you get the out of this ones and out of this ones and out of this one, you get the out of the left and the out of the right. So for example, if I go right here on a pulse width, right? I'm just gonna do maybe something like that. And what I'm gonna go, maybe I'm gonna go right here and say that I want to saw. And now I'm gonna be hearing, or maybe I'm gonna go there. I'm gonna get more of the other one. So maybe I want to turn this into a low frequency oscillator, right? And I can use the out of this one to modify whatever we have right here. Let's say this one. And now this out, it's, you know, modulating with whatever we get in the left, which is this. Now the thing is, of course, we are hearing whatever comes out of the, you know, the VCO3, which is the low frequency oscillator. But at the end of the day, this is what this does: is the out of the left or the out of the right. And then, of course, you're gonna need to do some patching right here to see how, you know, what you can get out of this. So then you have the other one, this section, which is going to be the reverb, and this is just a reverb, you know, nothing special. If I do reverb, you have the left side of the reverb or the right side of the reverb. This is again going to the left or going to the right. And it's kind of a spring reverb, I guess. Sounds like a spring reverb, or maybe a weird plate. Now the manual is very, I want to say complete. It's very, it doesn't explain much. It doesn't give you a lot of data, a lot of information of what's going on right here. They give you a very brief description, and that's it. That's why, you know, I'm recording this, because the manual is just super bad. So at the bottom, you get the out of the reverb, which is, you know, makes sense. You know, you get the reverb, and then you get the mixer out, which is going to be pretty much the same thing that you get on every single out. Now, of course, you need to be careful where you patch this, because if you patch on an in where you're, you know, already feeding, you're already getting something inside there, you're going to start kind of getting feedback, and you may be going to crash the plugin. Now, so far, we've been using the VCO2, 1, 3 to LFO something. Now, you don't need to. You have an LFO right here at the bottom. Now, of course, the LFO, by default, when you go to a default patch, which is what we are doing right now, it's connected to the mod wheel. And what is connected to the mod wheel is going to be the vibrato. Now, the vibrato, it's something that you get by default on this synthesizer. It's just, you know, it's just there. Now, of course, you can, you know, go down in the vibrato and you can kind of disable. But by default, when you press something, if you go up on the mod wheel, and I'm going up on the mod wheel, you get this vibrato. Now, this control, the vibrato depth is going to control how, you know, how far you go. But by default, it's just connected to the mod wheel right here. Now, you can connect anything you want to the mod in. You can go and connect the pitch bend instead of the mod wheel. So now the one controlling the modulation is going to be this one, which is the pitch bend. Right? So you can even do velocity. Maybe the velocity of the keys is going to modulate the vibrato. Notice I'm pressing very softly. We get less, and if I press hard, I get just, you know, a lot more. And you can even use aftertouch if you wish. You know, on this keyboard I'm using the key step, so if I, you know, press something, I get nothing, and if I press, you know, harder with the aftertouch, I'm getting that motion. So on some parts of the synthesizer, you're going to get a control that can go up on this one or it can go down. So this is kind of like the depth of the modulation. So if I go all the way up and I go to aftertouch, as soon as I do a little bit of aftertouch, it's going to go and it's going to go full, you know, full strength. And if I do just a little bit, the modulation is going to be a little bit less. Let me just do it again, you know, less, and we do more. So again, you're just, kind of modulating this a little bit more or a little bit less. Now, by default, it's the mod wheel. Now, what you can do, if you wanted to, you can disconnect this control. So now every time that you press, it doesn't matter if you're using the mod wheel or whatever. It's just going to go and kick in. You're getting that vibrato. Now, the thing is that the vibrato, by default, it's super crazy. So these ones are the control of the speed. So if I go down on the LFO speed, it's just going to go down. If I go up, it goes up. Now you have the off and on. You can mid-sync to your DAW. Right? Now, what happens if you don't want, vibrato? You just go all the way down, and that's it. You just get no vibrato at all. Now, these controls right here, these outputs, they're going to be the outputs for the LFO. So this is how you patch the LFO to something. So right now we are using the oscillator number 1. Let's say I want to maybe do an LFO to the cutoff frequency, or maybe just, an LFO to the VC, to this one. By default, it's using the VCO2 as a frequency modulation source. But maybe I don't want that. Maybe I want to use this LFO. So now you just can patch it right there. And the one that's going to do the the frequency modulation is going to be the sine wave of the LFO. That's why you have this symbol right here. This is a sine wave, a triangle, a saw, a square, and then a triangle. Now you can connect multiple sources, or you can output, to multiple sources. Let's say I want to go to the cutoff frequency, and if I go down, maybe I'm gonna go disable this one, and we get, that modulation from the LFO. Now you also, you can do maybe a different waveform if you wish. Now notice as soon as I press a key, if I go right there, the modulation kicks in, right? Right, so you have the LFO delay. So this is what we'll do, and notice it's in milliseconds. It will delay kind of the execution of the LFO as soon as you press a key. So let's say I say maybe, I don't know, 2 seconds, or maybe 1.5 seconds, or something like that. I'm going to press a key, and the LFO will not kick in until, 1.8 seconds. So I'm going to press something, no LFO, and then kicks in. So this works as well, and it's something that, we use the whole time with the vibrato. Maybe when you press a key, you want to wait a little bit before you get the vibrato. So then you get these X vibrato in. So by default, the vibrato, it's going to be a kind of a sine wave. Maybe you want to do something else for the vibrato. Let me just disconnect this one first. I'm going to go just disconnect, and I'm going to go back to what we had from before, right? So I do something, and we should be getting that vibrato. If I go up on the mod wheel, let me just go back to a default patch, and let me start over. All right, so I'm going to do something, and if I go up on the mod wheel, we're going to get the vibrato. We can do more or more, and then slower. Notice this kind of a sine wave goes up and down. So maybe I don't want this, I don't want this waveform to do the modulation. So I can disconnect whatever it's using for the vibrato and use a different waveform. Now I'm going to be using a triangle. And then we get that. Or maybe I just want to use some of the oscillators on low frequency mode, and I'm going to go and I don't know, maybe bring a triangle right here. So now the triangle of this one is going to be the one that will modulate the vibrato. Will provide the instruction for the vibrato. So that's the X in. Now, the voltage processor is something that you don't get on any synthesizer. So I'm going to go slow on this one. Okay. So the voltage processor, what it is a mixer, is an inverter, and it's going to be an attenuator. So it can do all of that. And it works in different ways. So let's just start easy, and then we are going to make it a little bit more complex. So right now, we have the default patch, right? I press a key, we get a sound. So the mixer, it has an in A and an in B, right? It has 2 different ins. And notice if we go down, we have 1 and we have 2. So you have 8 ins. You have the 1 and 2, 3 and 4, 5 and 6, and 7 and 8. Now they all work in, kind of go in twos, like 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. And they all go in one straight line and they go out. So they are kind of a separate channels. You have 4 separate channels with 2 ins each. And okay, so let me just give you an example of what this is. And you're gonna say, oh, why? This was very simple. So first I'm gonna go to the VCO1. I'm gonna bring a saw from the VCO2. I'm gonna bring a saw and patch it in on the in of the A, right? And the 1. And then I'm gonna do the same thing, but this time I'm gonna bring maybe a sine wave, right? Just something like that. So now, of course, if I play something, nothing is gonna happen because we are not doing anything. We are just connecting to this, but we are not outputting. So maybe instead of using the oscillator number 1, which is, what we are using right now, I can go out and override the oscillator number 1 and say that right here we are going to hear a combination of the oscillator number 2, the saw, and the combination of the sine wave. Maybe I'm going to do pulse because it's just a little, kind of not easier to hear, but it's noticeable. So there you go. So what you're hearing is a combination, a blend of the A and B, which is the oscillator 2 and the oscillator 3. If I go to the left side, we hear the oscillator number A, which is the saw. And if I go to the right side, you get the square. So that's it. It's just very simple. It's just like a mixer. The other thing that you get right here is the inverter kind of a section. So if I go all the way to the saw, right? So you're here on the spectrum, on the oscilloscope, we can see that this is a saw, right? If I hit this one, I'm going to invert the saw. So that's what it is. It's going to invert. That's it. So then what you get at the end is going to be an attenuator. This is also called lag. Sometimes it's going to be called, I don't know if you kind of always forgot, the slew. Is a slew rate, when you use the slew rate. So it's going to like that. Now, when you use it with audio just like this, it's just, it's not gonna get a good sound because it's going to cut a little bit too much. Because the purpose of this one is, to do a different thing. But you can use it as an attenuator. This is just, maybe getting the out of the A. So you're attenuating the out. That's pretty much what it means. Now, this works better when you do something else that we're gonna do in a minute. So then you get other things like the mod in. So this one, what we'll do, pretty simple, it will just modulate this knob. Just like we would do if we add a low frequency oscillator to the cutoff frequency, then we can do something like that, for example. Well, this is the same thing. I can bring a modulation, could be whatever you want, maybe an ADSR, or maybe a different oscillator, or maybe the out of something. I'm going to bring the LFO. So I'm going to go right here and say that maybe I'm going to go and do this one. So now this one is going to modulate this control. It's going to do something like that. Now, of course, this one, it's connected to the mod wheel. I'm going to disconnect it so we can get that right away. And of course, it's the vibrato on. And notice that we are getting some movement right here. And notice on this one, you also get the kind of the mount control. Same thing you get on the mod in. Now it's super fast. I'm going to go a little bit slow. And what it's doing, pretty much, if I go all the way in, is doing something like this. So that's what it does. That's the mod in. Now you can go slower or, do a little bit less of amount. And instead of going all the way up, all the way down, it's just going to go and do something like this, It's going to be very mild. And also you can go negative values, of course. Now, if I do something like this and I go more to the A, of course, we're going to get more of the A and less of the B because the modulation is something like this. So the position of this knob, of this slider, kind of really matters. Depends on what you want to get, more of the A or more of the B. But you can go really aggressive and, the sound's still going to change if you're at the middle or all the way to the left. Let's not invert it. Now the lag control still, cutting a lot. That's going to help a lot. So that's what you can do. You can bring, maybe an envelope just to do the same thing. Now you can do all the things. And for now, I'm just going to maybe disconnect this one. So notice that you have a link right here. So maybe you're wondering, okay, so, what I want to do, I want to blend different oscillators on the A and different oscillators on the B, and then I want to go out and get the crazy sound. So if I grab a square from this one and I try to connect it right here, it's going to disconnect the previous one. So you cannot connect multiple sound sources to the same in. You just can do one, which is, it sucks. But, it doesn't suck that bad because notice that you have other ins and they're all linkable. This means, and I'm going to give you the example right now. Let's say that we go to the example that we have before. We have the saw and we have the square, right? This pulse and this pulse. And we are doing a 50% and then we go to the out to the 1. So now what I want maybe a saw right here. I'm going to connect it to the 3 and I want something else from this one, from the square, and I'm going to connect it to the B. So now we have 3 and 4 with a saw and a square from the first oscillator, right? Cool. But we are not getting anything out. And what I can do, I can maybe connect it to a different place. And now we get a combination of the 1 and 2, the out of the 1 and 2, and then a combination of the 3 and 4. And then maybe it can go to something lower so we can hear the difference. But maybe, I don't want to use 2 different outs for 2 different chains. I want to use one chain for all of the connections. So you can do this, and that's the main purpose of the link. What happened here? Okay. So that's the main purpose of the link. So the link, what it will do, it will make the 3 and 4 go through the 1 and 2 out. So now, notice that we are getting the 1 and 2. If I link, we are going to get whatever that comes out from the 3 and 4, and it's going through the 1 and 2. So that's what the link means. So maybe I want to, bring something else to the 5 and 6, just to, get something more complex, something like that. And I can link this one too. So now the 5 and 6 is going through the 3 and 4, and the 3 and 4 is going to the 1 and 2, and then going out to the same output source. And you can, of course, create combinations of all of this. Now, you don't need to go A and B or going to 50% of something. You can go, let me go back to default. You can just maybe blend different saws, from in and A. Let me just go right here. I can go to this one and bring, a square, doing a little bit of pulse width modulation. And then, get the saw from this one and go all the way to the A, all the way right here, all the way right here, and then just link them. And whatever that comes out is, what you're going to be using. Right, so pretty simple. Now the modulations still going to work. If I patch this, maybe I do something like that. And I'm going to disconnect it right now. Let me just remove this. Notice that this one, it's kind of a moving if I disconnect it. So let me just go again. Maybe go to this one. You can hear it right there at the bottom. Maybe if I connect something else, it's going to be a little bit better. I'm going to go right here. There we go. So you can, create a lot of different connections, then blend them and then go out to something, or maybe use it as a modulation source. Okay, so back to default, we were using something like a triangle, saw, or whatever, just a sound source to create a blend and then go out to something. Now, you can use this on a different way. You can kind of create your own LFOs or combine different LFOs and then go out and modulate something else. For example, I'm going to go to default, of course. Go to LF, which is the low frequency mode. And I'm going to use a saw and I'm going to go to mod in, right? I'm going to get, a triangle and go to the number 3. And I'm going to get maybe, a pulse, something narrow. And I'm going to go to the number 5. Now, right now, what we can do is link, and go all the way to the left because we are not really using the right side. So now you're bringing the LFO from the left and the right, and you're bringing different waveforms in LFO mode. So the out can be used to modulate something else. So I can put this on the VCO1, which is, what we are using right now. And if I go up, you're going to start getting, different modulations because you're kind of combining all of this at the same time. And you can, of course, do blends, or even you can, modulate all of this and bring something like this, and you just go crazy. I'm gonna go there. Maybe bring a little bit of cutoff. And maybe modify this so we can have different rates right here. Right? So super cool. So now the lag, and I'm gonna go back to full frequency so we can really hear this. This lag is gonna make sense a little bit more. If I go really slow, we get a kind of a slow or a kind of a mixed, motion. But sometimes it's too harsh. So this one, the lag, is going to smooth all of this. If I go up, notice this is smoothing everything as I go up. Notice that the transition that we see right here is just much smoother. So this is also considered something like, the glide control when you use the glide. So, well, this is kind of something like that. It's just kind of smoothing the transitions so you get something, not so harsh. If I go and do something maybe super harsh and I go up, it's going to smooth everything. So that's it. The voltage processor is a great thing and is a very creative thing that you don't get on a lot of synthesizers. And now, of course, we talked about what we can do, all the possibilities that, the synthesizer has, just doing the connections without using all of this. And now we can use this to, create whatever we want. It's just, just a great thing. Now, if you don't know what sample and hold is, you can go to the web, type sample and hold synthesis, and you're going to find a lot of different examples for this. I'm just going to explain with simple terms and lame terms. Now, behind the scenes, what it does is going to take tiny snapshots of a sound source. And if that sound source is constantly changing, the snapshots, of course, are going to be different because the sound source is changing. So imagine you go to the mountains, okay? And you grab the phone, you put the camera, you press the phone, and you take multiple snapshots of that. And at the end, if you press it for 1 second, you're going to get 100 pictures of the same thing. What happens if you press and hold and you start moving your phone? You're going to get 100 snapshots or 100 pictures of, different things because you're moving the phone. You're still getting the mountains, right? But you get different parts of the mountains, different snapshots. So this is the same thing. Those snapshots are going to be instructions to, create a modulation or do something. Since you're moving the phone, of course, the snapshots are going to be different, so you're going to get a random behavior. Now, the thing is that if you move the phone on a very robotic kind of a way, and it's always the same motion, at some point, the snapshots are going to be exactly the same if you time the movement. By default, the sample and hold is kind of a pre-wired to some sections of the synth, just like the BC01, and always we will start from the default. And okay, so if I press something, we get a sound, and if we go to here, we get that weird random sound. Now, of course, the sample and hold can be controlled. So you have the level and the rate, and notice that you have two sides, this side and you have this side. So the level is going to be kind of like the amplitude of what we are doing. So if I go down, we're going to do less of that. It doesn't matter. I'm doing a lot right here. If I do nothing right here, you're just not going to get anything. Let me do a little bit less of the frequencies because it's too bright. As you do more, of course, you get a lot. You get more. Now remember that this is going to take the snapshots at some speed, and the sound source is going to be noise. That's why, it's so different and it's so random. Now the speed is going to be decided by the rate. How fast you take the snapshots. Very slow or very fast. Now, of course, if you have a rate, this means that this is kind of connected to something. There is a clock. So this sample and hold has an internal clock. And you have the options right here. We're going to talk about this in a minute. But, maybe you don't want to use the noise as a sound source to create the sample and hold modulation. You want to do something else. So this is the in. So what you can do, you can maybe take an LFO and I'm going to go and put it right there. And I'm going to disconnect this so we can get the LFO, and I'm going to go down on the vibrato. So now the noise, which is, very unpredictable, is not the sound source of the snapshots we are taking. Is the LFO. And the LFO, it's always constant, and it's the same thing. So now the modulation is going to be a little bit predictable. Now, of course, if you go too fast, we cannot see this. But if I do something like that, maybe a little bit faster, notice that it's very predictable now, because the sound source is predictable. Right, so that's it. Of course, you can grab whatever you want and put it right here, and it's going to be used as a, a sample and hold source. So by default, to get this rate, notice that it goes faster or goes slower. So this has an internal clock, and it's going to be like an LFO, and it's a square waveform. So, and it says right here, int clock out, and then you have, a square. So we know that the clock is a square, just like an LFO. Now, if we don't want to use this, we can override the internal clock, or maybe we can use the out of the internal clock. So this one is going to be the external clock. So if we connect something else here, we are going to be overriding the rate, and we are going to use something else as a clock. So maybe I can go right here and connect the pulse of the oscillator number 3. I'm going to go in low frequency mode. So now this rate is just not going to work anymore. So this is going to be the one that will control the speed, because this is the clock now. So we are overriding the clock. So you can use whatever other source to override the internal clock of the sample and hold. All right, so then you have the sample and hold out, and this is the same thing that you get on the other ones as well, For example, on this one, if we don't do anything, we do, maybe I leave the, the LFO, this one. We are getting the sound source right here. But if I do this, I'm connecting the sample and hold out to something that already has a sample and hold. So it's like doing the same thing. But maybe you want to connect the sample and hold and use it on something else, maybe right here. So if I connect it to this one, you're going to get the same result. So yeah, that's, the out of the sample and hold, which is kind of the same thing we get on other, different sections. So then you get the internal clock out. So since this one has an internal clock, we already talked about this, we can use it as an LFO. So for example, if I go right here and connect it, and they're going to go way down on this one, notice that we get that behavior going on and off. So if I go really slow, we see that on and off, because this is a square. So now this is just an LFO. So for example, if I, if I go right here and do this LFO and go slow, we get the same behavior. Right here on the right side. Oh, and one more thing. This one is the MIDI sync for the clock. So let me just go and do something like that. Notice that if I do this, it changes. Let me just do maybe something like that. Notice that the speed changes. And it's because, of course, this one on the left side is going to be MIDI sync, and on the other side it's going to be free mode. So it's just free. You're not doing MIDI sync. All right, so I'm going to go to a default patch again, and I'm going to show you what the electro switch it's going to do. Now, it's really cool. It's a little bit weird to explain, but it's really cool. So instead of just using whatever it is that we are using as a sound source, we can use a combination of two sound sources. And the electro switch will toggle between A and B, which is, sound source 1 and sound source 2. That's what it does. So, okay, so first I'm going to maybe try a sine wave on the A. Now, what we need to do right here is going to be connect the electro switch to some other modulation. So right now, this one is going to be the out. Just like this one is the out of the sample and hold, this one is going to be the out of the electro switch. So I'm going to go and override the sample and hold with the electro switch. So if I do something, we are not going to get anything. So I'm going to go to low frequency mode on the, on the oscillator number 3. And now I'm going to go right here and provide a little bit of, modulation. And notice that we are going to get something crazy. Now, if I go slow, I'm going to go slow so you can hear what's going on. No, can you notice, can you notice what's going on? Notice at some point, the modulation, it's not happening. It's just standing there. And then at some point, it goes and it's going to do that modulation. Modulation, nothing. Modulation, nothing. And this is because the electro switch is toggling between the A and the B, and the rate of how much you toggle is going to be this one. Since you're going slow, it's doing a little bit of modulation of the A, and then after a while, when the cycle is done, it's going to change to the B. But on the B, we have nothing. That's why we get no modulation, modulation, no modulation, modulation. So if I connect something else like a saw on the B, now we're going to be toggling between a sine wave, and then we're going to be toggling, with a, sine wave and a saw. So it's going to be sine wave, saw, sine wave, saw. And we can even go slower so we can really see sine wave, saw, sine wave, and then saw. Now, of course, we can go faster and get really cool sounds. Now, of course, this is following the internal clock. What you can do, of course, you can connect a different clock, just like we did with the other one. All right, so now we have discussed all the things right here at the top. We know what everything does right here at the top. We know the voltage processors. We know the noise generator. We know the sample and hold. We know the LFOs. So now we need to talk about this section that we get right here. Now, and then we're going to talk about this one, of course. But right now, this one, the most important part of this section is going to be the envelope follower. The other one is going to be the ring mod. I'm going to go to default, of course, always on default. And if I go down on this one and I go up on this one, we get the ring mod. So this one, of course, is going to decide how the ring mod works. You get the VCO1 and VCO2 by default, and notice that you get the the saw and a sine wave from the VCO2. But right here, you can change to whatever you want. Maybe you want a triangle on this one, and it's gonna change how it behaves. So let's see the same on this one. Maybe I want to change this one, and it's gonna change how it behaves. So also you get the out, just like you get the out of everything else. And at this point, I feel like I don't need to explain it because we kind of already did this. So you can use the out for whatever you want. So then you have the envelope follower, and this is like the most interesting part of this section. So I'm going to go to DAW mode. I'm going to close this. I'm going to show you what I've got on the DAW. So on the DAW, I get a kick, and it's just a normal kick. And if I do play, we get the kick. And I'm gonna leave it right there. So this one, the ARP, what it can do, we can get audio inside the synthesizer, and that audio in is going to listen to whatever audio that we fit in, and it's going to create an envelope out of that. That's what's called envelope follower. That's what it is. So it depends on your DAW. You have different ways of doing this. I'm inside Bitwig, so if you go to right here to wherever your plugin is, and you go right here, you can have the sidechain. And if you select the kick, you're going to be using that kick as a source. So in this case, I'm going to go to pre. So now the synthesizer is listening to that. Now, of course, the envelope follower needs some kind of an instruction in order to provide an envelope. And this works with the preamplifier, and it works with this knob that you have right here. So the preamplifier is pretty much, how much you get of this. And this works, again, with this. If we don't have anything right here, notice that nothing is going to light up. If I go nothing is happening. We are getting no instruction, almost no instruction. Now, if I go up, the instruction is going to be very clear. Now, of course, if I go up on the preamplifier, it's going to get stronger and stronger. If I go down on the preamplifier, it's going to get, pretty much not recognized. So you need to kind of find a sweet spot right here where, the light, it's following whatever sound source you're using, you're feeding into the synthesizer. And then, of course, you need to kind of select the level. So this one, this fader, is the level of the envelope follower. So we can connect this to something on your synthesizer so you can, use it as a modulation source. I'm going to use, for example, the number 1, the oscillator number 1, and the sample and hold. So if I press something like that, and let me just make sure I'm on default, and I'm gonna do it again. I'm gonna go and connect it to the sample and hold. Right there. Right. So we get just a tone. Maybe you're gonna go lower and do a little bit less of frequencies. There we go. And I'm gonna go up on this one. Notice that we get nothing, but we do get some kind of a change. Now the envelope, of course, we need to provide a little bit of value right here. And we are going to get that modulation. Now, if you go too much, of course, the sound is just going to be too strong and you're not going to be able to modulate a lot. So you need, again, to find the sweet spot right here between this control and this control. And notice how the envelope changes, how the value changes when you start, changing the values. And if I go down on this one, you're gonna get less. So that's it. So now you can use this as a modulation source. So I'm gonna start on a default patch again, and we're gonna talk about this section, and this is pretty simple. I press something, and let me just do a little bit of cut right here. I press something, we can go sharp or we can go flat. That's the global tune, and this is, pretty simple. Then you have the vocal detune, and this is just not going to do anything if you're in mono mode. So what is going to happen is that when you change to Unison, nothing's still going to happen. But if you go to your voices and you select, many voices, you're going to be working in Unison mode. And again, I'm assuming that you have a little bit of experience, so I don't need to explain what Unison is, but you're stacking all the voices. So with this one, you are going to detune them, and they're going to go down in volume. So you are going to detune the voices, and maybe not that much. That's it. That's this control. Now notice that when you hover, it says Unison 9 voices. So you can just do 9 voices of Unison. It doesn't matter, you're using more. So then you have the poly mode, which means that you can make chords, right? You can just, play whatever chord. And when you make a chord, the detune is still going to work. Notice that it's detuning the voices. Let me just go to the keyboard and play an octave up. It's still doing the detune. So that still works. So then you get, a tone reference. So you can tune whatever it is that you're using. But at this point, since you're using a DAW, maybe it's better to use a tuner. But, it's nice that you can get it. Then you get the keyboard, which is going to be kind of a gate mode. And all of these options, they work kind of a better with a sequencer. But if I press a key, you're going to get that, that gate sequence mode. And the key BD, well, if you're in the middle, you're not doing anything. And let me just go maybe to Unison. If you're at the middle, nothing's going to happen. If you go to keyboard, you're going to need to press a key in order to get that. Let me do a little bit of Unison. Now, the other one, the auto repeat, it's going to mean that you don't need to do it. I'm not pressing anything. I'm not doing anything at all. So it's just doing it behind the scenes. But as soon as I, play a key, it's just going to follow that. Now, the speed of how it goes is going to be the LFO speed. Right, so, pretty simple. Now, on this one, this is going to pretty much do, this is going to change the to legato mode. This is legato, and this is retrigger. Now, I would really love to find a good explanation of how it works on this synthesizer, but because I just couldn't get it to work. And on the manual, of course, the manual is it's just unusable, unreadable. It gives you no information about what this is. It says, this is the retrigger and it's legato and retrigger, but I'm just couldn't get it to work. I'm gonna give it a new try maybe when I do the sequencer, but just playing keys and mono, unison, or poly, It's just not doing what it's supposed to. And in terms of play modes with the synths of Arturia, what you get is you get different play modes, right? You get the low priority or the high priority or the last priority. And on this one, you don't get that. It's just low priority the whole time. And then you get a hold, right? You press the key and it's going to just hold it. So you can still use this on the keyboard. It's gonna be like the same like the auto repeat. And remember that on a lot of other things, the things that we have right here, they're gonna be kind of connected to this one. But in this case, it's just, you know, it's just not. Now we're gonna learn how to do this on the next video I'm gonna record about the sequencer. We're gonna learn how to use this and do kind of the same behavior. Now the last thing we need to talk about is going to be the effects. You get a chorus, right? So by default, it's off, it's on, and then you get a delay. By default, it's off, and you're gonna get that delay. And I feel like at this point, after, you know, everything else, I don't need to explain this. You know, this is pretty self-explanatory. This is a chorus and a delay. Pretty simple. I feel like I don't need to explain it. I much prefer to spend time explaining what this does. So the tracking, and I'm gonna go to a default, and I'm gonna explain this again, very simple, in a very simple way. Because this thing can do two things. This can be a really cool kind of a envelope generator, LFO-ish kind of a thing. So we can draw our own envelopes, and whatever envelope we draw is going to be used as a modulation source or as a source of something. So for example, I'm going to go right here, and I'm just going to do whatever. And we can go to this mode, which is the kind of a pen mode, and we can draw whatever we want. And I'm just going to do something dumb, something like that. It doesn't matter. So now we have an instruction. Now you have like 4 different points. You have the 1, the 2, the 3, and the 4, right? And right here, you can change between them. Of course, you have the erase and, you know, you have some options so you can create different waveforms. And what this does is going to provide an instruction to something. We are on default patch. We have this instruction on the number 1. So I'm going to go from the out of the number 1. Notice that we have an in and we have an out. And we're going to talk about the in a minute. So I'm going to grab the out and I'm going to go to the sample and hold of the first one. Because remember, this is an LFO instruction. This is a modulation instruction. So if I press something, nothing happens. We need to do a little bit more. A little bit of this. And notice it's not the sample and hold. It's going to be this. And it's showing you right here how it's doing it. Right? Super awesome. It's just like a custom LFO that you can draw and you can do whatever you want. Now you have 2 main controls. You have the frequency, which is going to be how fast you go. Now, let me do a little bit of cutting frequencies. You can decide how fast you go. You go slow or super fast. Now this one is on free mode. So you can MIDI sync this one and it's going to be synced to the tempo of your DAW. So far, super good. So notice that the changes right here are very abrupt. So you're going to get that, you know, abrupt change in modulation. So the smooth control works like the control we had right here on this one on the voltage processors. This is just going to smooth the transitions. And now we have, you know, a more smooth transition, a more smooth LFO. Now, you get 4 of this. So you can draw all the things on this one, maybe something like, I don't know, something like that. And you can use the 2 to even modulate something right here on the same oscillator. It's going to be a little bit weird, but you can. Or maybe you just can use it on a different, you know, oscillator and do the same thing. So I'm going to go. So this is one way of using the tracking. You have a second way of using this. And let me just disconnect this one because if not, it's just going to be a little bit confusing. I'm going to go and disconnect it again. And I'm going to go back and I'm going to go to the number 1. And on the number 1, I'm going to create kind of a saw. Something like that. So let me go there and do a saw. So now, you know, we have a saw. So I can connect it to the sample and hold of something and do some kind of modulation. Of course, it's super fast. Let me just go there. And I'm going to go there, and I'm going to go just use the oscillator number 1. I'm going to go there and go faster, right? And if I don't smooth, we are just going to get, a saw modulating, doing frequency modulation on the BCO. Pretty standard. We did this already. Now, the thing is that you can have an in, and this in is going to create kind of a blend between whatever is that you're feeding in and whatever instruction that you created right here. And the easiest example is going to be with a square waveform from the, and I'm going to disconnect this for now, from the LFO. I'm going to use a square, and I'm going to go, maybe there at that speed. So now if I do the same thing, I'm going to press a key. We're going to get something like that. So I'm going to go slower on this one. And can you hear what is going on? So this instruction, the LFO, the square, is an on and off kind of a thing. It's going to go on and off, on and off, on and off. And it's constant. It's not going to ramp down. So this is doing that instruction of on and off, but at the same time it's ramping down because this is the instruction that the tracking has. And since, of course, they are using different frequencies, they go on a different speed, we are going to get that behavior. Now, the cycle of the square wave of the square, it's much faster. And this one is much slower. So we're going to get, that da-da-da-da-da-da-da. And that is with the square. It's the many cycles on the same cycle of the one cycle of the square, the saw that we have right here. So if I go faster on the frequency of the saw, we don't get that effect anymore, and we are just going to get a different effect. Same thing if I change the other one. If I go slow on this one, but now if I go slow on this one, the effect is going to be a little bit different. We still get it, but it's not that obvious than going on different rates. Now, of course, you can decide how aggressive you can go on this one. Maybe you just want a little bit. If you go to the middle, you're just doing this and you're doing nothing of the LFO. And you can go in negatives, of course. And of course, that's it. It's pretty simple. You just can use it as a modulation source, or you can use it just to combine different modulation source and get an out of that. So now it's going to be experimentation time. You need to spend some time doing some, experimentation. And my recommendation is that the best place to start is going to be the default patches that you have. Maybe you want to create a bass sound, so I don't know, maybe you can go there and just see how they create it. So now you know that, they are connecting a saw and a square, and they go right here, they override this one. It's using overriding the ring mod to just use the square. It's using the oscillator number 2, sine wave, and it goes to the oscillator number 2. It's using the noise generator right here as as noise on the VCO number 3. It's using right here the mod wheel to control the keyboard, right? So now you know all of this. So the next step is going to be the sequencer model, the sequencer. I'm going to cover this on a different video because this is just, a monster. It can do a lot of things, and some things are not that easy to explain. And I'm going to need to provide different examples just to show you how it works. So I'm going to do it on a different video. I'm going to release it in a couple of days. So hopefully, I'm a little bit tired, this was too long. And hopefully you like this, you learn something, from this video. And remember, of course, to like and subscribe and to check Patreon just to keep the things going on this channel, all right? So see you on the next one, which is going to be the sequencer.